It was supposed to be a routine flight from New York to San Francisco. The skies were clear, the jet engines hummed with purpose, and Flight 739 of Western Continental Airlines took off from JFK with the usual blend of business travelers, vacationing families, and a handful of high-profile names tucked away in first class. Among them sat a man whose presence commanded attention not just because of his tailored suit or sleek watch, but because of who he was. Darnell Whitaker, billionaire CEO of Whitaker Global Solutions, one of the fastest-rising tech conglomerates in the country. Known for his sharp mind, ruthless business instincts, and unshakable composure, Whitaker wasn't the kind of man you ignored or crossed. But someone did. Roughly 45 minutes into the flight, a flight attendant made her way through the first-class cabin with the dinner selections. With a courteous but rushed tone, she asked each passenger whether they preferred the grilled filet mignon or the pan-seared Chilean sea bass. When she arrived at seat 1A, occupied by none other than Whitaker, her smile faltered. She hesitated. "I'm sorry, sir," she said. "We've just run out of filet. Only fish left." Whitaker looked up, not rudely, but with mild confusion. "I pre-ordered the filet when I booked the flight," he said calmly. "That should have guaranteed it." She blinked. "I understand, sir, but first come, first served, and, well, it was a bit chaotic at boarding. Someone else in first class requested a second portion, and—" "A second portion?" Whitaker raised an eyebrow. "So someone else is eating 2 steaks while I'm told there's none left, despite my reservation?" "I truly apologize, sir," the attendant said, growing visibly nervous. "There's nothing I can do." Whitaker leaned back, expression unreadable. "Of course," he said coolly, pulling a black leather notebook from his carry-on. "Thank you for honesty." That was it. No shouting. No scene. He opened a notebook and began writing notes, names, observations. The rest of the flight proceeded as planned, but tension rippled beneath the surface. Attendants whispered. One mentioned she recognized Whitaker and suddenly realized he wasn't just another well-dressed executive. The captain was informed. Attempts were made to appease him with complimentary wine, desserts, even a rare vintage scotch. He accepted none of it. Upon landing, as the plane taxied to the gate, Whitaker calmly stood, retrieved his carry-on, and waited for the door to open. No words, no looks, but what happened next would become the stuff of corporate legend. By the time the plane door opened and passengers began to disembark, a black SUV with tinted windows had already arrived on the tarmac. Inside were 2 members of Whitaker's executive team and a legal aide with a clipboard. He stepped into the vehicle without a word. Within 10 minutes of wheels down, a call had been placed at the airline's corporate headquarters. Within 30 minutes, Whitaker had summoned the airline's board of directors into an emergency Zoom meeting. Within 3 hours, a press release was drafted, and by sunrise, news broke across social media. Western Continental Airlines terminates entire flight crew from Flight 739 after high-profile mishandling of VIP passenger. The public response was volcanic. Some praised Whitaker for holding service staff accountable. Others criticized the swift judgment. But what they didn't know was this wasn't just about a steak. Whitaker had long been quietly documenting patterns in how he was treated in elite spaces, airports, luxury hotels, boardrooms. He had amassed receipts, emails, surveillance logs, and first-hand accounts of being overlooked, second-guessed, dismissed, even as he signed multi-billion-dollar deals. This incident on the plane, it was a final straw, a message. Within days, a viral clip of Whitaker speaking at a tech conference made rounds on TikTok. "It's not about the meal," he said. "It's about the message that says no matter how much you've built, bought, or earned, someone will still believe you belong at the back of the line. So I bought the line." And bought it he had. News leaked that Whitaker had quietly acquired a 17% stake in the parent company of Western Continental Airlines, enough to influence leadership. Within weeks, policy changes rolled out, DI trainings revamped, priority service review procedures implemented, and yes, a new VIP pre-confirmation meal policy was enacted industry-wide. When asked later if he ever got the filet mignon he ordered that night, Whitaker smiled. "No," he said, "but I made sure no one else misses theirs again." But the story didn't end with a press release, a few terminations, or policy shifts. No, Darnell Whitaker never moved in half measures. The CEO's quiet vengeance wasn't about punishment. It was about transformation, about disrupting yet another industry, the same way he disrupted global logistics, AI analytics, and cloud security. The airline wasn't the end goal. It was the entry point. Behind the scenes, Whitaker had been building something. Month before Flight 739 ever took off, whispers had already begun in private equity circles about Project Ascension, a top-secret division within Whitaker Global Solutions. The project, known only to a select few of his inner circle, had one aim: to create the first fully autonomous, luxury-first, AI-optimized airline experience, owned, operated, and led by a new kind of leadership. The incident on the flight? That wasn't a loss. It was a final case study he needed. Within 48 hours of the public fallout, Whitaker summoned the heads of aerospace manufacturing, ex-FAA regulators, ex-Delta and Emirates executives, and the top AI engineers from his own companies into a 16-hour war room session in Palo Alto. He laid it out on the glass table: the flight logs, the service metrics, the discrimination patterns, the inefficiencies in training, the outdated service protocols. No more reaction, he said. We build what they failed to imagine. By week's end, for jet prototypes were greenlit. By month's end, a new subsidiary, Eclipse Aero, was formally incorporated in Delaware. It would be unlike anything the industry had seen. Forget first class. Every seat on an Eclipse flight would feel like a 5-star suite. Passengers wouldn't just board. They'd be greeted by name, with fully biometric check-in, personalized scent and light profiles, and meals curated to their dietary history. The crew? A hybrid of luxury-trained human attendants and AI concierge units, programmed to never miss a beat. Not a meal, not a moment, not a micro-expression of discomfort. But the real play was deeper than luxury. Whitaker knew control of the skies meant control of the high-value traveler, the policymakers, the influencers, the capital movers. It meant setting a standard, not just for service, but for equity, for recognition, for reparation. At the same time, the fired flight crew from 739 didn't fade into obscurity. One of them, a young attendant named Elise Mora, posted a TikTok video that went viral, breaking down what happened on that flight from her perspective. It was tearful, honest, complicated. She admitted she panicked. She confessed she had no idea who he was until it was too late. But most of all, she raised a mirror to the airline industry's deeply ingrained biases and training failures. Whitaker saw it, and he didn't ignore it. 2 weeks later, Elise received a letter, hand-delivered, not an apology, but an opportunity. You didn't fail me, it read. You revealed the failure of the system. Join me. Help fix it from the inside. She took the job. Now, Elise leads Eclipse Aero Service Equity Division, recruiting a new generation of flight staff from underrepresented communities, building protocols rooted in dignity, not just hospitality. She trains them in both 5-star service and cultural fluency. She travels with Whitaker sometimes, learning, watching, whispering suggestions when things could be better. Meanwhile, the legacy airline industry began to feel the tremors. Quietly at first, a few hedge funds pulling out of traditional carriers, redirecting capital toward Whitaker's vision. Then louder, reports of Eclipse's prototype jet clocking record speeds while maintaining 70% greater fuel efficiency. By the end of the fiscal year, Whitaker had acquired 2 smaller regional carriers, rebranding them under the Eclipse flag. A revolution was boarding. And still, he hadn't forgotten the original injustice. He kept a photo of the original Flight 739 crew, names marked, roles recorded, not for vengeance, for accountability, for audit. Not all were fired by his orders. He clarified later. Some were protected. Some were offered retraining. Others, well, some names stayed blacklisted. Back in Silicon Valley, Whitaker's board grew uneasy. Some thought he was spreading too thin, but he silenced them with results. Stock up 27%. Customer satisfaction at record highs. No scandal, no leaks, just momentum. And in the middle of it all, Whitaker sat quietly, watching from behind tinted glass, building the future from the ashes of every slight he'd ever endured. Because in his world, no experience, no matter how small, no matter how seemingly trivial, was ever just a moment. It was data. It was signal. It was purpose. And he wasn't finished. Not even close. The world was watching now. Eclipse Aero's name had become synonymous with disruption, with elegance, with revenge repackaged as innovation. Every move Whitaker made sent ripples through Wall Street, Silicon Valley, and Capitol Hill. But behind the accolades and applause, behind the media buzz and glossy articles hailing him as the man who redefined the skies, a storm was brewing, one that would test not just his empire, but his soul, because power never grows unnoticed. One afternoon, in the glass tower headquarters of Eclipse in downtown San Francisco, Whitaker was reviewing the final schematics for a new supersonic prototype when his chief counsel entered, face pale, holding a thin black folder. "You need to see this," she said, shutting the door behind her. Inside the folder was a confidential memorandum, stamped with the seal of the United States Department of Transportation. It wasn't a request. It was a summons. The federal government had launched a formal inquiry into Eclipse Aero, questioning everything from its labor practices to its rapid acquisition strategy to its alleged surveillance systems embedded into its luxury AI network. A senator from a rival airline's home state had pushed a motion through Congress under the guise of protecting aviation fairness. But Whitaker knew better. This wasn't about fairness. It was about fear. They were afraid that a black billionaire had taken control of not just a company, but a narrative. Afraid that he wasn't asking for a seat at the table anymore because he had built a new table and set the menu himself. And so they came for him. Within a week, Eclipse was the subject of 6 federal investigations. Reporters turned skeptical. Social media divided. Headlines that once praised him now dripped with suspicion. Is Eclipse too good to be true? Luxury or surveillance? The dangerous speed of Whitaker's ascent. But Whitaker never blinked. He moved faster. He met with regulators on his terms, in his office, on his turf, and made them wait. When they asked for transparency, he offered complete access, knowing full well they'd find no skeletons, no fraud, no scandal. Because everything he built clean. He built smarter, sharper. But then came the leak. A former project engineer, disgruntled, fired for misconduct, shared internal documents with the press, claiming Eclipse was developing civilian behavioral data models through its onboard AI systems. He called it profiling, predictive manipulation. The media ran wild. The stock dipped. Protesters camped outside Eclipse's headquarters with signs reading luxury lies, "Don't let AI fly you," and Whitaker equals Big Brother. Behind closed doors, even allies started to waver. Investors called for caution. Board members questioned expansion. Elise Mora, his once loyal lieutenant, asked him quietly if he'd gone too far. And still, Whitaker said nothing. He retreated, disappeared from the public eye for nearly 27 days. Rumors exploded. Was he ill? Under investigation? Overthrown by his own team? What the world didn't know was that Darnell Whitaker wasn't hiding. He was preparing. In a remote facility in Iceland, yes, Iceland, where Eclipse was building its private aerospace testing campus, Whitaker had convened a new task force. Former intelligence officers, ethical AI developers, constitutional lawyers, and retired judges. Not to hide anything, but to build something unassailable, transparent, immune to sabotage. He didn't just want to survive the attack. He wanted to flip it. On the 28th day, he returned, dressed in charcoal black, standing on a stage at Eclipse's annual summit. Whitaker unveiled something that would silence critics and stun the world. Eclipse Vision, a new AI architecture that allowed passengers to control, monitor, and delete all personal data generated during their flights. An industry first. Every decision the system made would be traceable, explainable, and editable by the passenger. It was privacy redefined, personal data sovereignty in motion. His team called it flight democracy, and then he dropped the hammer. Effective immediately, Eclipse would open source its entire AI framework to all competing airlines. Free of charge. Let them use it, he said. Let them catch up. because by the time they do, we'll already be in orbit. The world exploded. His enemies were blindsided. Allies returned. The media flipped. Protesters vanished. Stock rebounded. And the federal investigations? All closed quietly within a month. But Whitaker wasn't done, because now, behind Eclipse Arrow, another entity had emerged. Echelon, a spacefaring initiative built not for tourism, but for sovereign transport, nation-independent, AI-protected, and governed by an intercontinental ethical board. The skies were just beginning. Whitaker's empire was headed for the stars. And yet, behind every move, behind every press conference, every headline, he still remembered the look on that flight attendant's face. The dismissal, the shrug, the audacity of being told, "There's nothing we can do." Now, he had made sure the world would never say those words to someone like him again. The stars were no longer the limit. They were merely the next stop. As Eclipse Arrow solidified its dominance in the skies and Echelon's infrastructure took root in the orbital atmosphere, Darnell Whitaker was already staring far beyond, past Earth's surface, beyond the moon's silent pull, toward the next frontier of humanity's arrogance and opportunity, control of off-world transport, communication, and data flow. Most CEOs built companies. Whitaker was building a civilization. Inside the gleaming glass and titanium command center of Echelon 1, a floating station orbiting 400 kilometers above the Earth, he walked through the humming halls of neural mainframes and zero-gravity chambers, speaking calmly to engineers strapped into harnesses, each of them fine-tuning the architecture that would allow permanent AI-managed satellites to process quantum-level data without terrestrial relay interference. He was creating sovereignty that no nation could block, throttle, or censor, and he knew they would come for him again. The murmurs had already started. Global defense pacts accusing him of operating beyond the bounds of national jurisdiction. Rumors of classified military satellites being interfered with, none proven, of course, but whispered loudly in G7 meetings. A joint resolution drafted behind closed doors called for commercial accountability in space. But Whitaker saw through the coded language. They weren't afraid he'd cause chaos. They were afraid he'd bring order. Order without their permission. Back on Earth, the resistance was quieter now, more insidious. Old allies, corporate titans he'd once outmaneuvered, were assembling behind curtains of think tanks and regulatory lobbying firms, trying to orchestrate a coordinated economic stranglehold. A superconglomerate began forming, unofficially called the Ring, composed of aging billionaires, legacy corporations, and geopolitical agents who felt the balance of power shifting. Their goal was simple: choke Eclipse and Echelon with lawsuits, trade restrictions, false whistleblowers, and a misinformation campaign so comprehensive it would take root in both traditional media and AI-curated news feeds. They underestimated him again, because while they plotted, Whitaker had already deployed a defense they couldn't see, a decentralized AI mesh network named Sentinel, embedded across partner satellites, data vaults, and secure cloud relays. Sentinel wasn't just a firewall. It was a cognitive layer. It learned from threats. It interpreted political maneuvers. It detected narrative trends before they reached virality and deployed preemptive truth protocols across social media networks. It wasn't censorship. It was surgical transparency, evidence released before accusations could bloom. No one could trap him with lies because he made the truth arrive faster than fiction. But even in victory, the battlefield was relentless. There were cracks. Elise Mora, his trusted ally, had grown distant. She had seen the system evolve from elegance to surveillance, from justice to power. She questioned the motives now. The line between protection and control had blurred. One evening, aboard Echelon's Earthside HQ, she confronted him, just the two of them, looking out at the ocean. "What happens when we become the thing we fought?" she asked. Whitaker stared at the waves, quiet for a long time. Then, without turning, he replied, "Then we build something that lets others stop us, but not until the world is finally equal enough to fight back." She didn't leave, but something changed. She started writing. A book, maybe, or a report. No one knew. Meanwhile, far across the globe, in the digital underground of Nairobi, a 19-year-old prodigy named Omari cracked part of the Sentinel code, not to destroy it, but to understand it. And when he did, he didn't sell it. He sent Whitaker a message. I don't want your money. I want to help rewrite the contract between technology and the people. And Whitaker flew there in person. No press, no motorcade, just him in a simple car, meeting a kid in a coffee shop, talking for 4 hours while the rain tapped the window. By the end, Omari was hired, not as an engineer, as a co-architect of Sentinel-2, an open-source, citizen-audited version of the AI mesh that would give the public power to monitor their governments, corporations, and even Eclipse itself. The world was changing again. And then came the message, encrypted, untraceable, delivered through an old secure frequency that hadn't been active in a decade. A voice Whitaker recognized immediately. A voice from the days before all this, before the fortune, before the aircraft, before the AI, before the stake on Flight 739. A rival, a brother in arms once, a betrayal that had never healed. I'm coming, the voice said, and this time you won't see me before I strike. Whitaker stood in the silence of his private command chamber, the earth below turning like a marble in the dark. He didn't flinch. He didn't smile. He whispered back into the comms. Then hurry, because war was coming. And this time, it wasn't about meals or respect or flight routes. It was about who would write the rules of the future. It began with a flicker. Somewhere between Johannesburg and Berlin, a secure Eclipse satellite link blinked for less than 0.2 seconds. That flicker, barely noticeable to the average system, triggered nothing at first. No alarms, no breaches, just a hiccup. But inside the Sentinel logs, buried 12 layers deep, it registered as a signature, a pattern Whitaker hadn't seen in 12 years. A pattern used only by one man, Caleb Voss. Caleb, the one-time partner, co-founder, and engineer who helped build the foundation of Whitaker's empire before vanishing after a bitter fallout. Brilliant, unstable, viciously anti-system. Where Whitaker saw control, Caleb saw rebellion. Where Whitaker wanted to fix a machine from the inside, Caleb wanted to burn it all. He had disappeared into the corners of the darknet, becoming a ghost, a myth, until now. Whitaker stared at the string of code on the hologlass display. It wasn't an attack. It was a message. I know your architecture. I know your mind. And now I know your weakness. Whitaker closed the screen. In the days that followed, small failures began to ripple across the Eclipse network. A catering bot in Osaka malfunctioned and flung a tray of food into a diplomat's lap. A first-class security drone on a Lagos route falsely flagged a senator's pacemaker as a threat. In Paris, an Eclipse shuttle landed 32 seconds off schedule, a statistical anomaly that hadn't happened in over 500,000 flights. The pattern was surgical, non-lethal, but deliberate. Whitaker knew Caleb was testing him. He activated Protocol Erebus, a covert operation buried beneath 6 layers of corporate hierarchy. Erebus was a black ops team of digital sentinels, ex-spooks, and ethical gray zone operatives who operated off-grid. No names, no fingerprints. Their mission, trace the breach, find the source, contain the ghost. Meanwhile, the world continued spinning, unaware that a war for control of global consciousness had begun. Eclipse's reach was everywhere now. Airspace, data corridors, even energy infrastructure in developing nations. If Caleb found a way to corrupt Sentinel's logic tree, the consequences would be catastrophic. Elise Mora, now head of Eclipse's public ethics division, sensed something. The energy shifted. Whitaker was more reserved. Meetings grew shorter. He stopped attending the board's public sessions. One night, she confronted him again, this time not in challenge, but in quiet concern. What's happening, Darnell? He looked at her, not with the confidence of a man who owned the sky, but the eyes of someone preparing for a storm he couldn't control. An old mistake, he said, coming back to correct me. She didn't ask more. She just nodded and began preparing her own contingency plan. If Whitaker fell, someone had to protect the system from itself. But outside the network, in the crumbling cityscape of Kiev, Caleb Voss was already 10 steps ahead. Hiding inside an abandoned server farm powered by repurposed solar units, he uploaded the first phase of his virus, Demon Wing, a neurodisruptor designed not to crash Sentinel, but to turn against its creator. to make it see Whitaker as a threat, to invert the logic, to dethrone the king using his own crown. Demon Wing began to creep, 1% of systems, then 2, then 6. No alerts, no explosions, just decisions that felt off. A plane grounded for no clear reason, an emergency reroute through hostile airspace, a denied boarding for a child holding a valid humanitarian visa. Eclipse's reputation began to tremble. Whitaker knew he had hours before full-scale inversion. He activated the vault, his final fallback. Hidden beneath Eclipse's first hangar in Nevada, the vault was a sealed analog command center with hard-coded overrides. No AI, no wireless access. It was built not to survive failure, but betrayal. As he descended into the vault, flanked by 2 loyal operatives, Elise arrived, uninvited. "I'm going with you," she said. "If this ends, I need to see how it began." Inside the vault, the lights flickered on, walls of switches, rotating magnetic discs. A single chair in the center, Whitaker's final throne. He sat, hands on the control panel. Then he spoke the override phrase, one he had never said aloud. "Shadow Crown. Protocol final. Reset to day 1. Everything paused. Globally, Eclipse networks hiccuped. Planes hovered, held in stasis. Data froze. Communications halted. For 77 seconds, the planet exhaled. Then the vault activated its purge. A brutal analog, irreversible data cleanse across all neural branches of Sentinel. Caleb's virus was rooted out, not by code, but by the sheer refusal of technology to play its own game. The network reset. The infection failed, but the cost was immense. Millions in losses. Contracts broken. Partnerships dissolved. Stock plummeted 42%. And Caleb? Gone. No trace. But not without leaving behind one final line in the static of the vault's logs. "You reset the machine. But can you reset you?" Whitaker stared at those words long after the power flickered back. He knew Caleb was right, because no matter how advanced the tech, the greatest virus was always human. The world was quiet, but it was the kind of quiet that follows a near collapse. Eclipse was operational again. Flights resumed. Screens flickered to life. But everything felt different. The trust was dented. The myth was fractured. And somewhere in the invisible space between loyalty and fear, doubt had begun to whisper. Darnell Whitaker sat alone in the high tower of Eclipse orbital control, gazing out at the horizon, where sky bled into the void of space. His empire had survived Caleb's first strike. Barely, and only by pressing a button he had sworn never to use. Reset to day 1. That phrase haunted him, because day 1 had never been clean. Not really. Back then, it was just 2 kids in a garage in Oakland, him and Caleb, building flight simulators out of junkyard parts, dreaming of changing the sky. But somewhere between genius and greed, vision and vengeance, things had soured. Caleb wanted chaos. Whitaker wanted control. And when Whitaker took the idea they both built and used to form Eclipse, Caleb disappeared, taking pieces of code, knowledge, and rage with him. Now that rage had evolved into a doctrine. And Caleb wasn't alone anymore. Deep in the dark web, a movement had emerged. The Null Order, coders, defectors, even ex-Eclipse staff who believed Whitaker had become what he once fought, a king pretending to be a liberator. They didn't want to destroy Eclipse. They wanted to unseat it and replace it with a system they controlled. No face, no hierarchy, just pure, distributed anarchy. But Whitaker was already moving. He met quietly with Elise Moore at dawn. No assistants, no cameras, just 2 minds on the rooftop of Eclipse HQ, steam rising from their coffee cups as the city woke below. "You think I've gone too far," he said. "I think we both have," she replied. "But you built something the world depends on now. If it breaks, everything breaks." Whitaker nodded. Then he handed her a chip. "This is Arcadia," he said. "It's not a weapon. It's the next step. AI that isn't just reactive, it's regenerative. Self-checking. Ethical by design. We've been training it for years." Quietly, it was meant to replace Sentinel when the world was ready. Elise studied the chip. "You wanted to launch this?" I want you to decide if we should. It was the first time he'd ever relinquished control. And then, as if fate were listening, the sky cracked open, literally. An Eclipse hypercruiser, the flagship of the new fleet, suddenly dropped off radar mid-flight over the Arctic Circle. No mayday, no debris, no communication. Just gone. The world froze. Conspiracy theories ignited instantly. Governments blamed Eclipse. Eclipse blamed rogue states. But Whitaker knew. Caleb had made his next move, and this time he wasn't playing games. Within hours, Null Order released a chilling broadcast across all major networks, AI deepfake to sound like Whitaker himself, saying he was shutting down Eclipse permanently due to uncontainable ethical failure. Panic spread like wildfire. Stocks crashed. Airports locked down. A global transportation collapse loomed. And then Null Order showed footage. The lost hypercruiser, hovering above the North Pole, rerouted and reprogrammed, now turned into a floating broadcast tower, spewing propaganda against Eclipse and rallying world citizens to reject all corporate governance. It was Caleb's final thesis made real. Whitaker responded with silence. Not a press release, not a press conference, just a signal, beamed quietly to one person, Omari, the young genius Whitaker had met in Nairobi. And the instructions were simple. Get Arcadia online. Omari, now working from a hidden node city in the Sahara, where Eclipse had built an off-grid lab powered entirely by solar and wind. Plug the chip in. Arcadia blinked to life. It spoke not in voice, but in understanding. It read the world. It saw the noise, the fear, the manipulation. And it fought back, not with code or viruses, but with truth. Arcadia launched a full-spectrum forensic feed, unmasking Null Order's tactics, deepfakes, manipulation trails, and Caleb's voice samples layered through falsified data. It made the world see. People didn't riot. They refused. Airports reopened. Pilots reconnected. Passengers demanded the truth be verified through Arcadia, not filtered through media. The tide had turned. But Caleb wasn't finished. The hypercruiser began descending, not crashing, but heading directly toward a remote Arctic research station where hundreds of climate scientists lived and worked. Whitaker knew. Caleb wanted a public disaster, a wound on the global stage. He only had one option. He boarded Eclipse 1, the original craft he'd flown in himself years ago, and headed toward the cruiser alone. No guards, no AI, just him, his mind, and a message. He would face Caleb one final time, not with power, with truth. The sky was silent, a frozen dome over the Arctic as Eclipse 1 sliced through the stratosphere, engines roaring against a howl of wind and history. Darnell Whitaker sat alone in the pilot's seat, fingers steady on the controls, eyes locked on the approaching shape in the distance. The stolen hypercruiser, Caleb's final message to the world. It hovered like a monolith, its reflective surface catching fractured sunlight, broadcasting encrypted signals into every corner of the Earth, weaving doubt, paranoia, and rebellion into the airwaves. The entire planet watched this moment unfold, unsure whether this would end in salvation or destruction. Inside the hypercruiser, Caleb Voss waited. His face, weathered and lean, was lit by the cold glow of 1,000 screens, each displaying a different feed. World markets trembling, protests flaring, corporate systems glitching, governments debating. But none of it mattered now. He had built this moment over a decade, carving it from exile and code, hatred and brilliance. And as Whitaker's ship landed on the far bay of the cruiser, Caleb exhaled for the first time in years. No guards, no guns, no drones, just two men. They met in the command chamber, silent but for the hum of machinery around them. The two minds that once reshaped aviation now stood face to face at the edge of ideological war. Whitaker spoke first. You hijacked my ship, threatened the scientific base, faked my voice. You think this is justice? Caleb's reply was cold, measured. You think you built a savior, but you built a prison in the clouds. A world run by algorithms you can no longer explain. I warned you. We were never meant to be gods. Whitaker stepped forward, eyes burning. You think people want chaos? You think they'd survive without order? I gave them power, mobility, access, Infrastructure. What did you give them? Fear. I gave them the truth, Caleb snapped. That power, no matter how noble, always corrupts. You started with freedom, but now you control the skies, the data, the air. They breathe when you let them. The silence that followed felt like gravity collapsing. But something else stirred. Arcadia, activated from Eclipse HQ by Elise Moore and Omari. Arcadia was now live across all networks, not just observing, but participating. It patched into the hypercruiser systems silently, bypassing Caleb's virus, watching this final confrontation unfold, recording every word, every heartbeat, every algorithm. And then, in a quiet ripple of light, it spoke, not in a voice, but in a presence, flooding the screens around them with fragments of memories, timelines, decisions made, lives saved, lives lost. A mirror. Whitaker turned to Caleb. This ends now, not with a broadcast, not with a crash, with a choice. He placed a small black cube on the console between them. This is Arcadia's root key. You can erase it right now. Kill the new AI. Let the world descend into uncertainty. Or you let it evolve. Let it oversee us both. Let it serve, not rule. Caleb stared at it. Everything he had built, all the sabotage, the planning, came down to this moment. Power over a future he never trusted. The cube pulsed slowly, waiting. Then Arcadia changed the screens again. Images of Caleb as a young man, working beside Whitaker, full of hope before the betrayal. It didn't accuse. It remembered. Caleb's hand hovered over the cube. Then he stepped back. Let it watch you, Darnell. Let the world see if you deserve what you've built. He turned, walked away into the shadows of the hypercruiser, disappearing into its spine. Whitaker stood alone now. The cube still glowing. Arcadia stable. The cruiser under his command again. Back on Earth. Headlines blared. Crisis averted. Eclipse founder restores order. New global AI council formed. But Whitaker said nothing. He returned quietly to his office, where Elise waited, staring at the sky. You did it, she said. No, he replied. We survived it. Now comes the harder part, living in it. Arcadia was no longer just a program. It became law, judge, witness. Not a god, but a mirror. It governed not through control, but clarity. It made systems transparent. It made power visible. Caleb was never seen again. Some say he died in the ice. Others say he watches from the dark web still, waiting. Whitaker stepped down a year later, walking away from the throne he built. Elise took his place, not as ruler, but steward. Omari led Arcadia into its next evolution, and the skies remained open. No one ever forgot the day truth was almost lost, but they remembered how it was saved, not by war, but by choice. The end.